Man, Greg Sindelar, I tell you, how about our new Chief Executive Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation? Holy moly, I'm so proud. I'm so grateful, and I'm not going to go on and on about that because you've probably already heard it before, but TPPF really was my first child, and everyone keeps asking me, well, how old are your children? Because you all remember me being pregnant for about 20 years straight at these events, but if you can believe it, Luke, this is our 20th policy orientation. My first child came to his first one when he was 4 months old. It was at the Driscoll, however many years ago, and he's a 17-year-old junior in high school, followed by his 16-year-old brother, Jake, who's a freshman, my 13-year-old Anna, who's in 8th grade, and my 11-year-old Lily, who's in 6th grade. And they love America, and they love freedom, and I think it all goes to the policy orientation at TPPF. So thank y'all for being here. What a joy. What a joy. I can't believe this is number 20. Senator Cornyn and Senator Cruz, we're going to have you on stage in just a minute, but welcome home, my good friends. Welcome home. We're going to talk a little bit more about it, but I will tell you from all my years here at TPPF and then going to the White House and having Ted Cruz on my right arm and John Cornyn on my left arm, they were warriors for freedom every minute of every day of every year we were in the White House. So we'll talk more about that, but thank you both for your leadership. There's a very special group here that I'm not sure have been introduced, but I think probably of all the introductions and all the fancy people and all the things we're talking about, other than our Fisher ladies up on the screen, are they here? That was amazing. I heard their voices. I think they're still here. Well, God bless you. Probably in a million years, you never thought to yourself, I would become the epicenter of the fight for freedom. I'm just running a business in the Northeast, but now you are the epicenter of the fight for freedom. So God bless you, and thank you for leaning in. And on that note, do we have our Southwest Freedom Flyers here? Are they here? Okay, so everyone, this is the other epicenter of the fight for freedom. And again, we're all in the arena. We're all fighting every day. We're all so grateful. These are the leaders, the pilots, and the flight attendants who said, no, thank you, Southwest Airlines. You will not tell me what to do. And they're right back there. So thank y'all for being here. Thank you for your fight. Thank you for being willing to enter the arena. What an inspiration y'all are, our Fisher women are. I mean, I'm just sort of blown away. And thank you to TPPF and everyone for bringing all these wonderful people together. Listen, 20 years ago, this is the 20th policy orientation for the Texas legislature. John Cornyn was the Attorney General of Texas. 20 years ago, Ted Cruz was the Director of Policy Planning at the Federal Trade Commission. 20 years ago, Greg Sindelar was a teenager attending Texas A&M. 20 years ago, at the first policy orientation, Donald Trump was a registered Democrat. And I was a 29-year-old young woman from Glen Rose, Texas, taking over a small think tank based in San Antonio. 20 years ago, we couldn't make payroll. I had just taken this job about 2 weeks before, and on my first day on the job, I went in to look at our books, and they said, well, we've only got $9,000 in the bank. Tim Lyles and Ernie and everyone will remember this. And I said, no, wait, how much is payroll again? And at that point, they said, well, it's $11,000. And I said, well, maybe we just don't pay me until we get this ship back on the track. But that was 20 years ago. But at the moment, if you all remember, for those of you that were here, we'd just taken over the Texas House. Tom Craddock is Speaker. Rick Perry had just been elected, duly elected, not stepping into George Bush's place as the new governor of Texas. David Dewhurst was the lieutenant governor of Texas, and it was time to pull the conservative movement together and fight for freedom in a way that no one had ever seen before. And the policy orientation for the Texas legislature was born. So that was the history of it 20 years ago, and what an honor to be here now today at this closing time. But you know how things have changed. 20 years ago, the United States was not at war with Iraq. It was not at war with Syria and not at war in Africa. 20 years ago, Russia was a friend. 20 years ago, saying that the next big threat to America would come from the Chinese Communist Party, or big tech or a progressive movement bent on abolishing police and taking education away from American parents would have gotten you dismissed as crazy. 20 years ago, I could still get the best communications device ever created, the BlackBerry, with a real keyboard. Still so sad about this. 20 years ago, the conservative movement was complacent in its belief that a frozen in-time Reaganism, which Reagan himself would have never endorsed, was sufficient to the needs and the circumstances for a brand new century. But 20 years later, all that has changed. John Cornyn and Ted Cruz are two of America's greatest senators. Greg Sindelar is one of America's greatest think tank leaders. And Donald Trump is one of the greatest presidents in American history. And American conservatism is changing, evolving, and emerging into something that genuinely serves the needs and priorities of Americans today, in this century, in these circumstances. How things change, and often for the better. Although I still can't get a BlackBerry, so if anyone can help me on that, it would be amazing. You know that keyboard you can type on as you're driving down the road? You can't really do that with them. A lot happens in 20 years. Part of our work as champions of liberty is to keep that change rolling in a positive direction. America speaks and we listen. That's who we are. But the other thing that is just as important is as things change, we stay rooted in the permanent things: liberty, America, history, heritage, God, everything that makes us who we are. We stay fixed upon them, not to anchor us in the past, but to light the way to our future. Just yesterday, 1 year exactly into the Biden administration, it's clear that its watchword is extremism and its legacy is disaster. Back in September of 2020, during a debate, President Trump predicted to then-candidate Biden that the far left would dominate him. Joe, they're going to dominate you. I was like, oh, can we make that a little softer? But still, Joe, they're going to dominate you. And that has turned out to be completely true. In every sphere, the Biden term has met with defeat after defeat, from a lost war in Afghanistan to a looming war in Europe to roaring inflation to supply chain breakdowns to out-of-control crime to an uncontrolled pandemic to the crisis at the border and beyond and beyond and beyond. The shame of it all is that every single one of these items was well in hand on January 19th, 2021. Had the amazing honor to run his domestic policy agenda. I was right in the middle of it for 3 years. But on January 20th, 2021, it all started to slip away. It slipped away because President Trump was right. Our current president is a walking political weather vane, unmoored to any enduring principle, is precisely the sort of president an elite cohort of radicals and Marxists will dominate and control. The pity of it is that the price is not paid by him or his elitists in Washington, D.C. or around this country. The price is paid by the American people. The radicalism of President Biden's agenda, conceived and advanced by the dominating left, is truly unique in all of our American history. There isn't enough time, not even in our 3 days here together in Austin, to cover it all. But suffice it to say, we've never seen anything quite like this. And suffice it to say also that the capstone of it all, the fundamental attempt to reshape America, we have seen firsthand, and Senator Cruz and Senator Cornyn have fought at the front lines with the Build Back Better plan and the Voting Rights Act, both of which, as of today, have been defeated. What has stopped the Biden agenda cold in this momentous year? It hasn't been the courts. It hasn't been the House. It has been the one place where conservatives can and have banded together as a last line of defense against this overreaching regime. The last line of defense since January of 2020 has been the United States Senate. The Senate has been the roadblock, the barrier standing athwart history, yelling, stop. That's why what an honor and joy and how relevant and prescient it is to have our two great Texas senators here with us today. Please help me welcome with a rousing round of applause Senator John Cornyn and Senator Ted Cruz.
How you doing? Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Well, hello, my friends. It's
Hello.
been a little while. I'm so glad to see you all.
Good to see you.
I know. Okay, so I think everybody knows this, but I should do just a couple lines of bio. So Senator Cruz went to very fancy schools, unlike you and me. He's an undergraduate from Princeton, his law degree from Harvard. He clerked with Chief Justice Rehnquist and worked in private practice. We all know, and I will tell you firsthand, I think Senator Cornyn would agree with this, and my time in the White House and lots of hours in the Oval Office, we were kind of always asking, well, what does Senator Cruz, from a constitutional perspective, can someone call Ted and ask him what's going on? I don't know that there's anyone in Washington, D.C. with a better grasp of the Constitution, with what we're trying to fight against, and really standing up during the 4 years we all worked together in Washington than you. So what an honor to have you here with us. Ted Cruz. Senator Cornyn, of course, Senate Finance, Intelligence, Judiciary, Attorney General, as I mentioned earlier, 4 decades has been serving the people of Texas, receiving his undergraduate from Trinity, law degree from St. Mary's, and LLM from University of Virginia. Senator Cornyn, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Brooke.
I would like to tell you I'm moved to tears by being up on stage with these two good friends of mine, but I think I have a piece of pepper in my throat from the steak salad. So forgive me. It's not COVID, by the way. It's a piece of pepper right there. But I say that. Thank y'all again for being here. And it's always a joy. And I will tell you, all the years of running this event in Texas for TPPF, for our Texas legislature, all those years, the two of you, well, first, Senator Cruz, you helped us launch the Center for 10th Amendment Studies here after Obamacare was passed. But you all would always make time to come home and be part of this event. So God bless you. Thank you for never losing sight of the people back home. So I mentioned the Build Back Better plan. I kind of want to start with that. And I will sort of maybe we start Senator Cruz with you, and then we'll move to Senator Cornyn. But there's no doubt that while today, thanks to a couple of your Democrat colleagues from West Virginia and a few other states, that it doesn't appear to be moving, for those of us that fought the Obamacare bill for so long, we know to really understand that it's probably never really dead. So I'd love your thoughts on Build Back Better, what it would have done to America, Senator Cruz, and really the path forward to continue to fight it.
Well, thank you, Brooke. Thank you for your leadership. And let me just say thank you to TPPF. TPPF really is the premier think tank, not just in Texas, but across the country. And the leadership role that TPPF plays is enormously important. As Brooke mentions, 15 years ago, she hired me at TPPF, paid me $0 an hour, and I earned every penny of it.
Big spenders here.
Quite a negotiation.
But we started the Center for 10th Amendment Studies together, and that was it has continued to fight for limited government and federalism. You know, you look at, so I refuse to use the White House's focus group titles. I call the bill Build Back Broke because that's what it is. It is Bernie Sanders' socialist budget. And if you want to pause to reflect at just how far we've come, 5 years ago, Bernie Sanders was the lone admitted socialist in the Senate. Bernie would tell you, I'm a socialist. I'm not a Democrat. I'm to the left of the Democrats. And all the other Democrats would claim, I'm not like him. I'm not a socialist. I'm different. 5 years later, Bernie's the chairman of the Budget Committee. And the number one priority of Joe Biden, of Kamala Harris, of Chuck Schumer, of Nancy Pelosi is to pass Bernie Sanders' socialist budget. It was originally scored at $3.5 trillion. That was a bogus score, because it assumed a whole bunch of programs would expire after 3, 4, 5 years. As we know, the closest thing to eternal life on planet Earth is a government program. And so if you simply scored Build Back Broke using a 10-year window, which is how you ordinarily score government programs, then it was $5.5 trillion. And it included trillions in new taxes. It was designed, Bernie said it was the most transformational legislation of his entire time in the Senate. Now, when an avowed socialist says, holy crap, this is big, that ought to get your attention. And they've tried for a year to ram it through. Now, it was always designed to pass with 0 Republican votes. So it was designed to get 0 Republican votes in the Senate, 0 in the House. It was never going to. They didn't speak to any of us. They didn't want any of us. And we're not talking, not even the most moderate to liberal Republican. They weren't interested in 1 Republican vote. This was going to be a party line exercise of brute power. Now, in the Senate, obviously, they don't have what I would call a dominating majority. It is 50-50. It is literally the narrowest majority mathematically possible. It is only a majority by virtue of Kamala Harris breaking a tie. And the White House and Schumer and the leftists decided to do something really bizarre, which is just try to bludgeon Democrats into obedience. And 48 of them, like docile sheep, just lined up, went straight into the pen, bleeding all the way. Astonishingly, 2 Democrats said no. Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema. They are right now integrally involved in saving the republic. The 2 of them, Joe's obviously from West Virginia, Sinema is from Arizona. They stood up and said no. Joe said no to Build Back Broke. They both said no to ending the filibuster. The grief, the nastiness they have endured, from crowds chasing them down the street, yelling at them. You know, Joe in D.C. lives in a houseboat. Little leftists riding up in their canoes to scream at him in his houseboat. Of course, Kyrsten getting chased into the ladies' room by angry leftists. And they have just been vilified. They have been demonized. And at least so far, they've said no. Now, you know, you mentioned before, Brooke, Frankenstein. Build Back Broke, I'm still worried about. Because the White House is quite honest that just like Frankenstein's monster, they're going to cut in pieces, and we're going to get Frankenstein's foot, and then we're going to get his shoulder, and then I don't even want to know what piece is next. But it ain't going to be pretty. And let's be clear, Manchin and Sinema are still both Democrats. They voted for a lot of crappy things. It is amazing how many bad things the 2 of them have voted for. So they held up on this. Joe has said the price tag was too much, but he said $1.5 trillion he could live with. Now, Joe has also said he's worried about inflation. Listen, West Virginia, Trump won West Virginia by 37 points. It's the 2nd biggest margin in the country behind only Wyoming. Wyoming is the only state Trump won by a bigger margin than West Virginia. So Joe Manchin has a reason to be concerned. But I think this year you're going to see them packaged together, in all likelihood, north of $1 trillion in new spending. And it's going to be whatever the Democrats negotiate. Whatever they get Joe and Kyrsten to yes on, I think it is going to be bad, but I hope and believe it will be much less bad than it would have been. And I will say, with Biden at about 33% approval, it is a very different dynamic. You know, when Joe and Kyrsten go home, frankly, this is not bad politics for Manchin right now. And it's also ugly. Let me make a final comment on that. So people ask me all the time, is Manchin going to become a Republican? Look, I hope so. I would love it. John has asked him to. I've asked him to. Every Republican has asked him to. You know, Joe was in Texas several months ago, did fundraisers in Houston and Dallas. Probably a bunch of the folks here raised about $500,000. I told Joe right after that, I said, hey, I saw you were in Texas with a bunch of my buddies. I'll tell you what, if you come over to our side, I'm pretty confident we could add a zero behind that really fast. And Joe, the blood drained out of his face, and he just ran away. He was like, you know, we were standing on the Senate floor, about 5 or 6 senators, all Republicans. Joe was there. Dan Sullivan from Alaska was saying, you know, Joe, Cruz keeps suggesting if you come over, we'll make you the chairman of the committee on everything. And I responded, I said, Joe, look, one of the two parties actually likes you. So I do think at the end of the day, they're still Democrats. I think they probably go along with something bad at the end of the day. But the one hope is they're being so nasty to them that they could drive them away. I mean, it really is. This past week, 2 pretty extraordinary things happened. Number one, Bernie Sanders publicly said he would support primary challengers to both Manchin and Sinema. And number 2, Schumer was asked would he support Manchin and Sinema in their reelection, and he wouldn't answer that. He said he didn't know. Now, I got to tell you, in the Senate, it is difficult to describe how extraordinary that is. I've been in the Senate 10 years now, a little terrifying. John's been there longer. I cannot think of any time in the Republican conference where any Republican has opposed one of our colleagues in a primary. I mean, that's a big deal. And to have the leader of the narrowest majority mathematically possible say, gosh, I think 48's better than 50, so I don't want you to, is a weird decision. So in some ways, I'm kind of quietly rooting for the lunatic, nasty socialist harridans because they might have the effect of driving them away from bad policy and in the direction of freedom. But absent that, we're going to have to be vigilant and fight this every step of the way.
Yeah. Well said, Senator. Thank you. Senator Cornyn, please go ahead.
I'm going to need to borrow your microphone.
Well, you've got, I think your lapel might work.
Oh, does that work? Okay.
There you go.
Okay. You guys were speaking in a handheld one, and I thought, what am I supposed to do? Okay, I'm hooked up. Okay, thank you. This modern technology kind of confuses me.
Yes.
Well, first of all, Brooke, let me just say it's great to be back at TPPF. A lot of memories came back as I was thinking about Dr. Leininger and his idea of this tremendous think tank and everything it's grown to be. And it's also been a very fertile ground for wonderful policies that have informed the sorts of things that Ted and I have done in Washington, D.C. The one that sort of stands out in my mind is the Right on Crime initiative and the sort of counterintuitive work we did here in Texas on prison reform. And I don't think many people expected conservatives to take the lead on prison reform, but yet now this is scaled up into a national model and is working. The sorts of things that were developed here in this laboratory of democracy known as Texas are now part of national policy. But, and I want to just say it's great to be here with Ted. I think Ted and I are the yin and yang of the United States Senate. We work very well together, and I just want to give Ted one particular plug. You know, one of the first things Joe Biden did when he became president was to kill the Keystone XL pipeline. And subsequently, when prices at the gasoline pump proved to be more than most people could take, he encouraged Vladimir Putin and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to pump more oil because we didn't have enough coming out of places like Texas, and no pipelines infrastructure, or not as much as we needed pipeline structure to build it. And Ted led the way last week in a vote that was hard won. The vote itself was hard won to make the point that Vladimir Putin's depending on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to go from Russia to Germany. And as we know, Putin is more than happy to use energy as a weapon. and to turn the energy off if his vassal states don't do what he wants them to do. So I give Ted a lot of credit for making that vote happen. It wasn't easy. I know he got a few dirty looks from some of the members who had to stay there late at night in order to
I'm sure
get
that really
done.
bothered you, Senator Cruz,
But
the
it's,
dirty looks.
but it all,
I've lost minutes of sleep.
yeah, whole minutes. Well, and so the question is about Build Back Better. I personally, I agree with what Ted was saying, but I think every day that went by that we were able to stop it is another day gained toward successfully blocking it. I think it's going to be really hard for them to put this back together. Speaker Pelosi talked about doing it in chunks, but I think it's to me, the most telling thing is when she said, well, maybe we need to call it something else. I think BBB, Build Back Better, Build Back Broke, Build Back Bankrupt, whatever you want to call it, is so tainted in the minds of the American people that it's not going to pass, certainly as it currently exists. And I think every day that goes by with Joe Biden's low poll numbers and every member of the House who's running for re-election is looking at their own prospects for re-election, they don't want to be tied to either an unpopular president or to policies which have proven to be toxic. So I think we've done what we needed to do in terms of stopping not only bad policy, but also saving the Senate. If most people hadn't really thought a lot about the filibuster, I presume it's not necessarily a dinner table conversation that most of you probably have. But I think more people learned about the importance of forcing us to do things that we maybe it doesn't come naturally, which is to try to find the Venn diagram where our policies overlap. We don't compromise principles, right? But when our policies, where we can find common ground, then that's a space in which we can work together and legislate. And I think that's what the 60 vote requirement before you close off debate does. It forces us to try to find that common ground and provide stability for the country. So I think we did save the country from a couple of really bad policies, one of which would have transformed the Senate forever, and I believe damaged the country irreparably. But it's been great, but every day is a new battle.
Well, that's 100% right. And it's interesting talking about Senator Manchin. We had gone in to do some polling in West Virginia before he stood up and said no on Build Back Better. We called it the big government socialism bill. And then we went back in after to look again. And his overall approvals went from 52 to 59% after his decision. Not surprisingly, what was really interesting is his strong support increased from 17 to 34%. His constituents back home in West Virginia were paying attention, and as a result, really went in a big way to support him. So
he needed to be careful, or they'd send Kamala Harris back into West Virginia.
Which is always such a good idea.
Which he's hoping for Bernie next time.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you both for those answers, and thank you for standing so strong on that issue. Another big issue that I know we have all been passionate about for such a long time is school choice. And while you all are in the U.S. Senate, and we certainly had conversations in the White House on what we could do under a Trump administration, ultimately it is a state issue. And I think Brian Harrison is here, the newly elected state legislator from Midlothian, I believe. And it's an important point. Senator Cruz, thank you for endorsing him. I know that was unusual for you in a Republican primary, but it was important, and not to put words in your mouth, because I believe what I understand is that you saw a rural Republican stand up and make school choice the #1 issue in their rural area of Texas. And the new Representative Brian Harrison, again here today, can't see you, Brian, but you can wave to everybody, won by 11 points against a former Texas House member on that issue. So listen, the last 2 years of COVID have opened a window for parents to see exactly what's happening in some of these schools. For those of us that have been in the school choice fight for a couple decades now, the Texas Public Policy Foundation was founded on this issue more than 35 years ago, I think now. I'd love to hear from y'all, really, how you see this mapping out across the country. 36 states have choice programs, and Texas is not one of them. So it's time to change it. This year, I think we go big. We're getting ready for next legislative session, but any thoughts y'all have on that would be great. Go ahead, Senator Cruz, then Senator Cornyn.
Sure. Listen, when it comes to school choice, it is, I think, the most important domestic issue in the country. It is the civil rights issue of this century. And look, I'll tell you, before I ever ran for Senate, I had a friend who asked me, what do you want to do in politics? And I said, listen, if when I die, hopefully not soon, although some of my colleagues might disagree, if when I die, my tombstone says, Ted played a meaningful role in bringing school choice to the kids of this country, I will die a happy man, because that is a legacy for expanding opportunity that is extraordinary. My legislative achievement I'm most proud of in the Senate is authoring the most far-reaching federal school choice legislation that has ever passed, which is expanding College 529 savings plans, not just for college, but now for K through 12. We passed it at 1 in the morning, 50-50 vote with the vice president breaking the tie. And you talk about Brian Harrison's race. So listen, if you're a statewide elected official in Texas, and certainly if you're in federal government, you got to be nuts to mess around in state political fights in Austin. I figure we got enough fights in D.C. that getting in the middle of every battle in Austin is a losing calculus. I, by and large, stay out of most of the battles in Austin and let the state officials fight over that. I make a big exception on school choice. And actually, each cycle I do something pretty unusual, which is I get involved in a fair number of contested Republican primaries across the state. And when I'm deciding who to support in a contested Republican primary, we have a spreadsheet, and I pull up every vote someone has cast on school choice. And if you voted against school choice, the chances of my endorsing you are essentially zero. And if you voted for it, if you've shown courage and leadership, then I'm going to look very seriously at engaging hard. And so it's something we've engaged in a bunch of races. And Brian's race, he was running against a former state legislator who'd voted on the wrong side of the issue. And I said, all right, I'm going to come in, I'm going to lean hard. You look at most of the other states, a majority of states are leading on school choice, and Texas is behind. And the dynamic of it, to take a little bit of realpolitik, it's a couple of things. Number one, we need more strong leaders in Texas who care about this issue and are willing to be voted out of office over it. If you look at the jurisdictions that have passed choice, they've had leaders that say, I don't care what the political price is, this is my legacy. We need more leaders like that care about it with a fire in the belly. But number two, there's a geographic dynamic that has been a problem in Texas, which is that you've got rural Republicans, and I love rural Republicans, but rural Republican state legislators in many rural districts, the largest employer is the public school district. And they're very vocal, and they oppose choice. And for a lot of rural Republicans, look, choice is predominantly an urban and/or suburban solution. In a sparsely populated urban environment, choice is much less of a salient policy idea. In downtown Houston or Dallas or Austin or San Antonio, it can make a real difference because you've got enough concentration of population that competition and choice can play out. We've got to find ways, both intellectually, and this is something I've talked with TPPF about, and politically, to make it a political winner, even in a rural district, to say, listen, this is not a threat to your public school. This is not a threat to your district, and so you can support choice as a civil rights issue to not abandon another generation of kids. I think it is a crying shame that Texas is lagging in choice. We ought to be leading the country. And whatever impact I can cut, I mean, look, not only do I endorse people, I mean, I've cut radio ads and run radio ads in races on choice. I care about this, and I'm going to leave everything on the field to try and get it done.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. Senator Cornyn, any thoughts from you? And then we're going to switch to China.
Yeah, you know, every time there's a tragedy, and we've all experienced tragedies in our lives individually and collectively, I always try to look for something good that's come out of that tragedy. And out of the tragedy of COVID-19 and the pandemic we've been living through for the last 2 years, one of the best things that may come out of that is a greater realization of parents over what their kids are being taught in school, and a recognition that for the teachers' unions, it's not about the kids, it's about them. And you know, we saw Glenn Youngkin in Virginia, in the governor's race up there, use these issues very powerfully to try to make sure that parents were empowered and not the teachers' unions or the teachers who really did not value the education of their children, as opposed to wanting to educate these kids virtually. There's all of this data points to the fact that the kids who suffer the most from virtual learning are low-income kids. And you know, when I was Attorney General, Brooke, we had the privilege, really, of representing single moms mainly in trying to enforce the child support obligation of the non-custodial parent. And so I can't help but always think about a single mom who's not able to go to work herself while she's at home trying to supervise maybe one, maybe two, maybe three of her children by herself, trying to supervise their virtual education. And there's no surprise that it has not worked very well for those children, nor for that single mom. So I think out of this terrible pandemic that we've been through the last couple of years, this may be one of the brightest spots, because I think parents realizing that they've been disenfranchised by the teachers' unions and by people like, you know, Terry McAuliffe, who said parents don't have anything to say about what their kids learn in the classroom, and the repudiation of that sort of attitude. I think that may be one of the most positive things, and I think school choice will be the ultimate beneficiary.
Well said, Senator.
So Brooke, let me follow up on that, because I very much agree with what John just said, and I do think there is a moment, as lots of parents have seen schools shut down. And last year, we had a really dividing moment on the Senate floor when we were voting on the $1.9 trillion, the so-called COVID relief bill, of which only 9% of it went for health care spending on COVID. We had what's called vote-a-rama, which are unlimited amendments, and it's one of the few exceptions where you can force an amendment. And so I forced an amendment vote on this. We were there all night till 5 in the morning. And the vote that I forced on the Senate floor was in this bill, the Democrats were giving tens of billions of dollars to school districts, public school districts, additional money. And so my amendment said, look, you're giving additional money to schools, this is great. Let's say the new money schools are getting, that as a requirement for getting this new money, the schools actually be open. That if you want the new money, you got to be open for in-person education 5 days a week. At the time, fewer than 50% of the students in America were going to in-person schooling 5 days a week. And I said, all right, if you're open, you can get all this money. It's raining down from Washington. I get it. We got money presses, and we're showering money on you. I got that. But my amendment says, if the school is not open, if the kids are not being taught, we can still send all the old money to the schools because we're idiots. We can do that. But the new money should go in the form of a scholarship, $10,000 per child to the kids, so while the school is closed, they can go to another school to get an education somewhere. Yeah. So we voted on it, and it was interesting. A couple of things happened. Number one, the vote was 50-50. So we got every single Republican By the way, after that vote, Susan Collins pulled me aside. She said, Ted, my entire time in the Senate, this is the only school choice bill I've ever voted for. And she asked me, she said, all right, this is just temporary during the pandemic? I said, yes. She said, okay, I can, during the pandemic when schools are shut down, I can agree with that. And so we held the entire conference, every Republican. So why didn't it pass? Because every Democrat voted no. And I got to tell you, I went to Democrats. I was begging Democrats. And I mentioned the 529 bill. That was in 2017. When that came up, Joe Manchin briefly voted for it.
Briefly.
He voted for it. He sat at his desk. Democrats surrounded him, yelled at him, and 5 minutes later, he flipped his vote to a no. So I went to Joe. I was begging him. One Democrat would have been the deciding vote to giving a lifeline to the millions of kids who've been left behind. Every Democrat voted no, and it failed by a single vote.
And Brooke, the last thing I'd say on this is I never have understood why, in order to get the financial assistance that you need to go to college, you can choose any college you want, any junior college, any four-year university, any place you want to go to school. But through K through 12 education, the money goes to the schools, not to the student. I don't get it, why we have that disconnect.
Yeah. Well, this state, the people in this room, led by this organization and lots of friends are going to change that. So be ready. It's all changing. All right, I know we're here to talk about domestic policy over these 3 days. Texas Public Policy Foundation focuses on Texas and domestic policy, but clearly there's a lot at stake around the world. And I want to talk and get your thoughts on China before we wrap up today and the threat that many of us see that China is to America, the American way of life. And it's interesting when you hear people compare China and Russia, the threat of Russia however many years ago. But from everything we have seen in my time in the White House, now building a national organization like TPPF to take these fights to the national level, it seems as though the threat from China is much more pernicious. It is much more inlaid with the very fabric of our country. And how do you both see the path forward? We'll start with you, Senator Cornyn.
I can't help but think about President Trump. He said, China. Ted's a much better mimic than I am, but well, I still remember Charles Krauthammer gave a speech 20-something years ago. He talked the unipolar moment. In other words, the United States of America was the only superpower in the world at the time, and how much the world has changed since that time. And simply put, China is the single biggest threat to our security and to our prosperity in the world. John McCain, may he rest in peace, who was an interesting character. We won't go down that road. But he said something I will never forget. He said, Russia is a gas station masquerading as a country. I mean, other than nukes, which is significant, that's all they got. They got nothing else. Nukes and oil and gas. So, but China...
Kind of like Texas.
But China is something else. I mean, number one, when they were admitted into the World Trade Organization, I think Joe Biden, among others, said that he wanted to bring them into the community of nations based on the rules-based international order. And boy, did they blow it. I mean, they don't play by the rules. They steal all of our intellectual property. It's essentially a police state. We've seen how they treat religious minorities like the Uyghurs. And they are a threat to our friends and allies, particularly and most imminently to Taiwan. This is a long subject, so let me just sort of narrow it down. Again, one of the lessons that we've learned from COVID is the vulnerability of our supply chains. You know, we had this idea that in a global economy, we'd do what we could do, but if you could do it cheaper somewhere else, we'd do it there without any regard to those supply chains. I remember calling Governor Abbott right after Ted probably did the same thing. After COVID hit, I said, Governor, what do you need? He said, we need two things. We need testing and we need PPE. I said, great. What's PPE? He said, personal protective equipment. I said, okay, I got it. I understand. He said, it all comes from China. And they delayed letting the world know that COVID had hit and hoarded all that supply, and we couldn't get it here. Well, that's just one example of a supply chain that was rendered vulnerable as a result of the pandemic, but it's not the only one. And I worry that in particular with something like semiconductors. Now look, I'm a recovering lawyer. Somebody had to give me a book called Semiconductors for Dummies to kind of understand it, but it's the microcircuits that make everything run. Everything with an off and on switch involves semiconductors. All of our weapon systems, the F-35's fifth generation stealth strike fighter and your cell phone, all depend on semiconductors. 90% of them come from Asia. 63% come from Taiwan itself. What does President Xi want to do? He wants to absorb Taiwan into the People's Republic of China. And it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Can you imagine what would happen if that supply of semiconductors was disrupted? What that would mean to our economy and to our national security? So that's just, again, another sort of lesson learned from COVID-19 about the vulnerability of our supply chains, and that's not the only one. But yeah, China's a big topic. It is top of our list. You mentioned I'm on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. And no, that's not an oxymoron. But I read every week classified briefings from our intelligence community on what's happening around the world, the threats to our national security. And believe me, the dominant position is always occupied by the threat that China presents.
Heard our former Texas congressman, then went on to run national intelligence for the White House, John Ratcliffe, talk at length about this. And he too served on the House's version of your committee and said it was overwhelming to understand what was at stake then.
Right.
But then to go run intelligence, he said that it is a massive threat to America.
Yeah, listen, I very much agree with what John just said. I think China poses the single greatest geopolitical threat to the United States over the next century. China's goal is explicit. It is global domination. China intends to be the dominant military and economic power on the planet. And I think we need the same sort of comprehensive strategy that we saw during the Reagan era for defeating the Soviet Union. We need to be fighting and contesting with China on every front. Part of that is telling the truth. And it is amazing that tyrannies, and communist tyrannies in particular, fear truth. Some years ago, I sat down with Natan Sharansky, the famed Soviet dissident. He and I sat down in Jerusalem. And he spent years in the Gulag. And he described how in the dark cells of the Gulag, they would pass notes from cell to cell. Did you hear what Reagan said? Evil empire, ash heap of history, tear down this wall. Those words penetrate. The Chinese regime is terrified of being called out for what they are, which is they are murderers, they are torturers, they are running concentration camps, they are liars, they are thieves, they are stealing from us, they are directly responsible for COVID-19, and they are a pernicious threat to the globe. So when I got to the Senate 10 years ago, I was laying out my view that China was the greatest geopolitical threat facing the country for the next century. At the time, that was a very lonely view in Washington. All of the Democrats disagreed, and most of the Republicans. They looked at China and they saw dollar signs as far as the eye could see. They saw a giant market. You had Joe Biden. Come on, man. Come on, man. They're our friends. Come on, man. And it's amazing. COVID did a lot, but one of the things it did is it opened a lot of eyes to the malice of China. So I've introduced over a dozen different pieces of legislation focused on fighting the Chinese threat, whether it is fighting their espionage, fighting their human rights abuses, fighting, holding them accountable for COVID-19, for the cover-up, for the Wuhan lab, for covering up its spread, or whether it is taking on their censorship of Hollywood and their propaganda. I introduced legislation, passed it into law, that shut down Confucius Institutes at universities all over the country. We need to be comprehensively fighting this. And one thing to understand, why is it that what John just said about Taiwan is so terrifyingly true? That right now, when Biden fled Afghanistan in terror and incompetence and surrender, every enemy of America looked at the Oval Office and took measure of the man sitting there. And all of our enemies were emboldened, and the chances of China invading Taiwan increased tenfold with that shameful retreat. And if you look at Joe Biden, number one, with every enemy of America, he deals with them with weakness and appeasement. But number two, the Democratic Party today is structurally pro-China. And it's an important thing to understand. If you look at the Democrats, their top donors, big tech, big Hollywood, big universities, are all funded by China. They're all dependent on that Chinese cash. And so the Democratic Party, and this is a good thing just to end this discussion on. So again, on one of the vote-a-ramas, I had another amendment that I teed up that we voted on, which was a very simple amendment. So, you know, Joe Biden has this Green New Deal agenda that he wants, and he wants to buy billions of dollars of electric cars. And my amendment was very simple, which is the federal government shall not purchase electric vehicles, solar panels, or anything else that are made using slave labor in concentration camps in China. It should be 100-0. We voted on the Senate floor. Every Republican voted yes, and every single Democrat voted no.
That's shameful.
It failed by one vote. You know, John Kerry said there are 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps right now being tortured, being murdered, being forced to build the products the Biden administration is paying for. And just think of the eyes of history. Look, there have been horrific chapters in the past of concentration camps. And when you have people who are funding, not only looking away, but sending billions of dollars to fund those concentration camps, the guilt of history is enormous on that. John Kerry was asked, you know, he's the climate czar for Biden, asked about the concentration camps and the slave labor. He says, sorry, that's not my concern, not my lane. You know, my response to that is we need to name John Kerry the concentration camp customer of the year. And a final point, just to put a bow on this. One of the reasons the Democrats vote this way is because our corporate media, half of which is in bed with China as well, is so corrupt that none of these Democrats get asked about it. When every Democrat votes in favor of importing goods from concentration camps built with slave labor, none of the Democrats get a reporter who sticks a microphone in their face and said, why are you willing to import slave labor? Why are you subsidizing keeping men, women, and children in slavery? And why are you paying their captors to continue their enslavement? We need a media that actually asks those hard questions, and we need to hold them to account.
Well said, well said. All right, we're going to do a quick wrap-up. I want to give you guys the chance for some final thoughts. If you'd like to give us a prediction on November of this year per some of these votes, I think that would be great. But let me say this, and I'd love your thoughts on this. The 4 years of the administration that we all worked in together, you all in the Senate, on the Hill, and us in the White House, were transformational in a lot of ways. But one of those, which I find so encouraging, is the new conservative movement. Our side now represents the blue-collar worker. Our side now represents, and we always did, but it really hadn't broken through in a way that I think we were finally able to break through. And we saw it. Glenn Youngkin's race in Virginia, I think, was the first test case of this. Hispanic vote, black vote, blue-collar vote. So what are your thoughts in terms of closing out this discussion, but more importantly, looking forward to the future of America and how we save the republic? Senator Cornyn, we'll start with you.
Well, the next major event will be the 2022 elections. By the way, you're exactly right, Brooke. When President Trump was in office, when we had Republican majorities in the House and the Senate, we were able to do amazing things. And the most sort of prominent thing that springs to mind is the best economy we've ever seen, certainly in my lifetime. The lowest unemployment rates in 50 years for African Americans and Hispanics and everybody who was willing to work. And then we lost all that under President Biden in favor of basically paying people not to work. And we've seen a lot of problems associated with getting people back to work, the labor shortages that we've seen as the economy is springing back. But 2022 is going to be a pivotal election. I'm pretty confident we'll see the House back. Historically, that's generally true. The party out of power usually picks up 25 or so seats in the midterm election. But President Biden, through his sheer incompetence and through the bad policies of his administration, I think have created an opportunity for us not only to build a firewall in the House of Representatives for the last 2 years of his term of office, but also to get the Senate back. And there's a lot we can do. One of the bad things about losing the majority is our ability to block some of these meddling regulators, the people who get confirmed by the Senate, and the policies that they enact through regulation. To me, one of the most important things about President Trump's administration was cutting through all that red tape of regulation, in addition to keeping taxes low, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. So I think the most urgent thing we can do, and we'll keep fighting every day to keep bad policies from becoming law, but the most important thing that I think we can do together is to make sure that we turn out in those midterm elections in 2022. I'm really encouraged to see particularly large segments of the Texas electorate, for example, Hispanics, recognize that Democratic policies are not your friend when they threaten your very livelihood. And I'm really glad to see us making good inroads among Hispanic voters, but not just Hispanics. I think everybody who values what we have inherited here in Texas with our love of freedom and security and prosperity, it's all on the line. And I think it's up to each one of us to do our part to make sure we turn out and we vote and we take our government back.
Amen, Senator John Cornyn. That's very, very well said. Very well said. Senator Cruz.
Well, look, I very much agree with those sentiments. Let me say, first of all, that I think the team that Texas has in the Senate is unusually effective. John and I are very different. John is refined and charming and genteel.
Sophisticated. Just kidding.
Me less so. But I'll say the two of us play very different roles in our conference.
Punch above our weight.
And the
There's
combination, no I can say honestly, I do not think there is another state that has a delegation that together has the same impact in the Senate that John and I do together.
That's exactly right. And having been in the White House, Having been in the White House and worked with all of the different projects and all the different senators, there's no doubt about that. It's one thing to watch it from Texas. It was magic to watch that from the West Wing. So thank you both.
Well, and we spent 4 years working hand in hand with President Trump, and what we accomplished during those 4 years for the people of Texas and for the country is extraordinary, and it is a policy record to be very proud of. It's a policy record that I think a lot of Americans are looking back wistfully for and wishing we had a return to. So your question is, what's next? Listen, 2022, I am incredibly optimistic. I think we are going to see not just a red wave, but a tsunami. I think the odds of Republicans retaking the House are north of 90%. I think we're going to retake the House. The Senate, we're going to have a very good year. It's not a great map in that there are more vulnerable Republican seats than there are Democratic seats. I used to think the odds of taking the Senate were 50-50. I'd probably up that to about 60-40. I just think we have a tailwind behind us now. We've got to win some contested seats, but the disaster that is unfolding, you want to know how bad it is? So Joe Biden last week went down to Atlanta to give a demagogic, racially divisive, hateful speech. And Stacey Abrams refused to attend. Now, mind you, Stacey Abrams is someone who I don't know if she's ever in her life missed a demagogic, racially divisive, hateful speech.
This will be the first.
But Biden and Harris were coming, and Stacey Abrams said, "Oh, sorry, I got to be somewhere else." She said she had a scheduling conflict. Now, let me be clear. We both had the president come to our state, and if you have a scheduling conflict, you clear your damn schedule and you go. It's not complicated. What does it tell you that Stacey Abrams, running in Georgia, says, I don't want to be seen anywhere within 100 miles of Joe Biden or Kamala Harris right now? That is a sign. You know, you talked about Virginia, Glenn Young, and Glenn is a good friend. I know Glenn well. I endorsed Glenn. I campaigned, spent 2 days barnstorming the state of Virginia. Biden won Virginia by 10 points. And yet, Virginia now has a Republican governor. That is the canary in the coal mine for what's coming. And so I think it is incredibly encouraging. A whole lot of people who may have pulled the lever blue last time are looking at this mess saying, I didn't vote for this. And you know, John mentioned South Texas. I think South Texas is incredibly ripe. McAllen has a Republican mayor now. A couple of months ago, I was in South Texas doing roundtables with community leaders, listening to farmers and ranchers frustrated out of their minds, listening to moms who are ranchers saying, listen, when my teenage kids go out on our ranch, I won't let them go without carrying a loaded firearm because there's so many traffickers that they're not safe on our own ranch because they don't know who they're going to run into. And they're mad. They're furious. They're saying, listen, this is America. How can I not be safe in my own home? At these roundtables, elected Democrats were saying to me, listen, if my party is the party of open borders, I can't support this. They're seeing the chaos that is playing out. By the way, I'll mention, John and I were talking about this before. One candidate I'm really excited about is a woman named Cassie Garcia. Cassie is running for the House in South Texas. She's running against Henry Cuellar. Cassie grew up in the Valley. She's a native of South Texas. She spent 9 years on my staff. She was my South Texas director, my deputy state director. She's principled. She's strong. She's beloved. The Border Patrol Union has endorsed Cassie. And I got to say, it's a sign of what's to come. You want to talk about a race we can win. And I want you to pause to think for a minute about an Hispanic woman from South Texas who's a conservative coming to Congress. And I want you to imagine the reaction from Nancy Pelosi and AOC as they run screaming the other direction. Look, Texas can and should be leading, and we're in a position to lead. One of the reasons the Biden White House hates Texas is because we're a glowing counterexample of you can be free, of low taxes and low regulation works, of people want jobs, of small businesses want to prosper, of our kids want to go to school, of people want to go to work. We're an example of common sense values. Texas, I think, has a hugely important role. And I got to tell you, between now and November, I am on the road over and over and over again, campaigning to support candidates, running for the House, running for the Senate. We are going to take the House, we're going to take the Senate. And John, I got to say, I'm looking forward to, in January of 2023, you and I will be walking down the hallway of the Capitol, and we'll run into a little man in overalls, carrying a screwdriver, coming to change the sign on Nancy Pelosi's office. And Nancy is going to get on her broom. No, okay, no, that's wrong. That's okay. She's going to get on her private jet, the USS Broom, go back to California. Schumer will head back to New York. And then I've got a plan. We're going to tell Joe Biden it's 2025, and he'll just wander back to Delaware.
Please help me thank our amazing senators from Texas.